Hello and welcome. You're watching BQ Conversations, and we're sitting down here with the Secretary of Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, Mr. Tuhin Kanta Pandey. Thank you for talking to BQPrime. In today's interview, I really want to begin with an assessment of the current global economic outlook as you see it, in terms of a suitable environment for strategic disinvestment. We see central bank tightening and RBI's response to inflation. How do you assess the climate for investments, strategic disinvestment?
I think the global environment is quite challenging, as you know. I mean, there is a worldwide inflation, there is a fear of recession in developed economies, advanced economies. We have emerging markets are not unaffected. Of course, India is still in the bright spot as compared to other economies. However, the foreign flows and other things do get impacted by the policies of central banks, especially the Federal Reserve.
Hmm. So I think I was leading up to that in terms of how much momentum of when do you see FPI is resuming, and what momentum of that would be required. While the markets are led currently by retail investments, but we would need foreign flows for a significant momentum. So what is your assessment on when we can see that perhaps resuming in good strength like we would expect it?
I think that domestically the flows have been good in this industry, particularly mutual fund industry, if you say. And although a lot of outflows were there in FPIs, there have been significant inflows from domestic market, and the Indian markets have actually held on. In between, I think the FPIs have also resumed, and there is a general optimism about India, although we have really a challenging global environment. So it depends upon the kind of flows which come in for disinvestment. I think the strategic disinvestment is something which is slightly different from the normal disinvestment, where there is the impact is, I mean, the objective is that the management control of companies are passed on under strategic disinvestment. So that is long term. It's not
Right.
really in that sense, coming and going as you have FPI flows in the markets, in the stock markets as such. So strategic disinvestment transactions as such, they take a very long time to culminate, starting from expression of interest in the first stage to the financial bidding in the second, and finally, the closing transactions and regulatory approvals before the companies can be management control can be handed over.
Right.
So I think those transactions will nevertheless proceed, because that depends upon the kind of bidders who may be interested. But the other flows do get impacted by the overall environment, economic environment, especially the global flows.
Right. In this particular momentum, I want to come back to perhaps closer to home in terms of the targets. A lot has been said on how much numbers have been achieved this time. We've gotten a little over 24,000 crores. But I want to rather ask on what will we see come to pass in the next 5 months, 7 months in. We have seen, some significant IPO listing in terms of LIC. But in the next 5 months, what can we realistically expect, sir?
I think we have some strategic transactions which have been already there on the table for some time. And for example, there is a Shipping Corporation of India.
Right.
There is a transaction on BEML. There is HLL Life Care. There's PDIL. These are all where the bidders are already, on to the due diligence, and financial bids are expected. The demerger process has already been substantially completed in case of BEML. Orders have been passed. The demerger orders in case of Shipping Corporation, where we are hiving off the land assets of the Shipping Corporation, that's likely to come soon.
Okay.
In case of NMDC Steel Limited, which is actually a Nagarnar steel plant of the NMDC, that has been also, the orders has also been passed, and the listing of the new companies is expected soon. So I think wherever we are in the advanced stages, and the financial bids could be expected during the during next few months,
Okay.
and maybe I think some of the transactions might close as well
Within
before the
this
financial
fiscal.
year.
Mhm.
There are certain other things in the pipeline. For example, IDBI Bank,
Mhm.
that expression of interest has been already issued,
Mhm.
and expected the expectation is that by 16th of December
Mhm.
we will have the initial interest, uh, whereupon we would proceed with the second stage of the transaction,
Okay.
and we will try that financial bids are received before the end of March,
Mhm.
although the closing of the transaction is going to spill over to the next year.
So can we expect, what would the timeline be on IDBI perhaps in the next fiscal? Of course, like you said, would spill over. But what could be a rough timeline we could expect on IDBI, sir?
Well, at this moment, I will not be able to really, exactly give you the timeline.
Mhm.
Much will depend upon the due diligence by the bidders.
Right.
But if we are able to succeed into, a financial bidding process by March, then I think a few months down the line, we will be able to obtain necessary regulatory approvals, in this case, RBI, and also other approvals like SEBI, etc., and
Right.
then close the transaction.
On that subject, sir, could we expect perhaps any, perhaps a little leniency in terms of relaxation of the norms when it comes to key shareholding for IDBI? Is there something we could expect for that, sir?
I think that is quite very well set. I think in terms of our initial EOI itself,
Mm-hmm.
where in consultation with the RBI, we have set out the kind of, you know, nature of the structure of the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So an open offer in any case will be applicable.
Okay.
So I don't think that there'll be more of a challenge there.
All right, sir. Coming to another one, Hindustan Zinc, would it also be expected to be completed in this fiscal, or how much would be offloaded? How much stake would be offloaded in Hindustan Zinc?
Well, Hindustan Zinc, as we have, earlier also told the markets, the transaction advisors and other advisors are in place, and the roadshows will be taken up,
Mm-hmm.
once the company is ready, and with due, within the norms of the SEBI. And thereafter, we will move, because if we have the OFS process there, there is a question of certain norms of the SEBI within which the OFS process takes place. It's a bidding process in the stock exchanges, and you will come to know whenever it is launched.
All right, sir. Now, I want to also come to listings now. This year, LIC listing happened, and right now the stock price is below IPO price, and some retail investors did not make as much money as they would have expected, perhaps. Do you see that would, LIC IPO would dent the prospects of upcoming IPOs listings?
I think LIC is a large corporation. It's a mature corporation,
Mm-hmm.
and it is still not very clearly understood by the markets.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little early, and I think we have been earlier been saying that it is medium to long term. The investors should look at it that way
Mm-hmm.
instead of a short term listing gains. The markets have reacted the way they have done. I think partly because it's a large player, and overall economic environment also does an impact. But I think the investors would also be looking forward to how the LIC carries on with a few quarters down the
Mm-hmm.
line, because it was initial days in terms of discovery of embedded value. It was also the nature of the transaction, the nature of insurance companies is such. Well, there are certain typical issues in the insurance markets,
Mm-hmm.
and going forward, I'm sure that they would have a lot to look forward to, particularly when the LIC is working hard, and that's what the management has said, and looking at various issues which the investors expect the LIC to do post listing. And once they are clearer in terms of results and communication,
Mm-hmm.
I think markets will react appropriately.
Okay. Then what other PSE listings could we see coming up, sir? Of course, the draft red herring prospectus is out for WAPCOs, but what other PSE listings can we come
I
to
think there
see
is
in
also
next?
we are preparing for IREDA, which is a Renewable Energy Development Agency.
Mhm.
IREDA, which used to be there, and IREDA is now an important player in the renewable energy market, and we are looking at that. We are also looking at ECGC,
Mhm.
which is an Export Credit Guarantee Corporation.
Okay. And now, in terms of just slightly shifting focus to perhaps some of the transactions that were put on hold or on hold for some reasons, I want to pick up on BPCL and when you could see that resuming. Currently, there is a lot of there is an energy spillover in terms of the crisis, and oil marketing companies have faced significant losses, and the government also helped them with a one-time grant for public OMCs. This would, of course, weigh in on the mind of any strategic investor coming in. How do you assess they would be reacting to this? Certainly, because it would be a market-based pricing. How do you assess they would be influenced by this, and when we could resume with BPCL?
I think I have earlier also stated that the BPCL transaction at that time could not proceed because of the inability, or I mean, they expressed, the bidders who were there in that process
Mm.
expressed their inability to proceed with that. And of course, we have to discover the price through a competitive bidding process. And obviously, the competition from bidders is important.
Mm.
And at the time as well, we
Mm.
have notified that we will be able to resume the transaction only when we have really seen that these current geopolitical and fuel related issues, especially in the energy markets, there is some stabilization.
Okay. And so I also want to ask, in conjunction to that, how would it affect the dividend receivables, especially to the government coming from OMCs? What is your expectation on that, sir?
Well, dividend are especially dependent on the profitability of the sector. And whenever the profitability does get impacted, the dividends do get impacted.
Mhm.
But as I said, that this is a part of a major transition which took place in both in terms of energy transition as well as the Ukraine crisis.
Mm.
And the crisis, in many cases, the spillovers are still continuing.
Right. So is there any timeline in sight for BPCL for now?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right, sir. And I just want to now close in with respect to expectations for the next fiscal. You have often mentioned that we should not take a top-down, but rather a bottom-up approach, and try to understand what could happen in terms of the market situations and the economic outlook. So, what all transactions do you expect to spill over in the next fiscal, and what would come to pass as you see it, sir?
See, well, when it is a strategic disinvestment transactions are concerned, they are in a way are set in terms of a certain process, which is as a two-stage process, and it takes about 9 to 12 months if we are able to sort of squeeze in as well.
Mm.
That's the kind of time that it takes to culminate. Because I said that management control, when you pass on, there are several approvals which are needed, and especially for a listed companies also where open offer is involved.
Okay.
Then, it's a question of the way we are operating
Mhm.
in the disinvestment strategy is a way of a pipeline. We have a certain in principle approvals from the cabinet,
Mhm.
and then we are we have to prepare the company, get to appoint advisors, and get to the stage, and then go to the next financial bidding stage, and then subject to the good bidding availability,
Mhm.
we are able to close the transaction.
Okay.
So we would have, as I said, at any point of time, certain transactions may be at advanced stages.
Mhm.
Some transactions will be in initial stages, and some transactions we are going to be launching, in the sense that although we have in principle approvals,
Mhm.
but then as the formal process begins once
Mhm.
we are able to issue the expression of interest
Mhm.
after due preparation as well as preparing the structure of the transaction. For example, like Concor, where we would be issuing the EOI soon. Similarly, we may have expression of interest for NMDC steel. We would have more expression of interest is also working at Air India, former subsidiaries of Air India, which includes Air India Engineering and Air India Ground Handling. And these are the kind of things that we are working on, and they are expected to be issued also. So it is like a pipeline, certain at advanced stages, some certain at middle stages, some certain transactions initial stages, and that will roll over. And whatever culminates, that actually gets into the thing. As I said, I would like to also highlight here that, when we are actually taking up the privatization transaction and close the transaction, we have to really look at it not only from the point of view of what receipts we get, but actually what kind of economic reform impact has been made. Ultimate disinvestment is, nothing but investment strategy. When you disinvestment from the government, actually somebody else is investing in the brownfield, and it's a very important opportunity for brownfield investments. And the objective is to have more jobs, more growth, and more of economic potential of that enterprise, raise productivity. And these are the kind of structural reforms that privatization brings about. So if you really see, it's not merely certain receipts that we will of course need. The government always need resources to do capex, to do social sector expenditure, to support farmers, to take up the social security. You always need resources which are within, within the fiscal limits. And therefore, apart from that objective of garnering resources for actually eventually spending it out for the welfare, it also makes a lot of impact on the way enterprises function going forward post disinvestment. And the evidence of that is quite clear, not only in India, but worldwide, that post disinvestment, post privatization, there is an element of productivity unlocking, a value unlocking, which actually benefits the economy. We have, for example, an economic survey of 29 FY20, where the 11 enterprises which were disinvested or privatized in way back in 2000, 2002, 2004, that those were actually analyzed to compare with their peer firms. And those results are all for everyone to see. The jobs have not been lost, the jobs have only grown, and the productivity has grown, production has grown. And some of those enterprises in between have really risen to world-class status from somewhere they were just not there when they were actually privatized.
So like you mentioned, reform and growth rather than solely a revenue concentration. So just coming back, you had mentioned like spillovers. So IDBI is expected to spill over to next fiscal. You'd also mentioned earlier Concor, NMDC. So in NMDC Steel. So anything else that might come from this year's spillovers that we're expecting, sir, next fiscal?
As I said, that these are the kind of transactions which are there on this, but there's HLL, Life Care, the PDIL, which are relatively on advanced stages, might close also, subject to the financial bids being satisfactory.
Okay, sir. Lastly, before I let you go, perhaps a realistic expectation of what we could have from the next fiscal's target, as discussions must be underway in the Finance Ministry. Along what lines can we expect a target for next year, sir?
I don't want to hazard a guess actually at the numbers, but disinvestment numbers are, number one is contingent upon, as you said, the markets and our ability to clinch the transactions. And that is not one-way street, because if we have to really disinvest, there have to be people to pick up that stake. So there has to be, you require two to clap. That's one. The second one, I would also like to say that disinvestment and dividend, they also go to some extent as together we have to look at it, because so long as we are not able to disinvest, we do have our equity giving us return in the form of dividend. So therefore, it's not to say that if we are not been able to actually disinvest, till the time we continue to also get resources through dividend, and they're quite substantial.
Right.
We had about 60,000 crore,
Mhm.
plus, which last year was extremely good.
Right.
But we do have, 40 to 50,000 crore kind of dividend receipts
Mm.
taking place, and
Mhm.
that's quite a large sum of money. In many respects, is larger than the disinvestment receipts as well. So
Right.
therefore, I mean, we continuously have to also, concentrate on the value creation in our CPSCs.
Mhm.
The CPSC's performance must always be up in there.
Mhm.
There are minority shareholders down there, and we must also take their interest in mind
Right.
in any disinvestment strategy. In my view, a calibrated, nuanced and disinvestment strategy in taking care of the markets and also taking care of the interests of minority shareholders
Mhm.
is a best value bargain, because ultimately the valuation of our stocks is equally important
Right.
than that, alongside the disinvestment.
I thoroughly understand, but would it be fair to say perhaps a target in lines with what we expected this fiscal, or slightly more?
No, I mean, because it's the budget number that is I'm not privy to, which is
Okay.
basically revealed at the right time.
Okay.
But in general, our effort has been to go for a moderate targets,
Okay.
achievable targets, and targets which do not also you know also take into account the current realities
Okay.
of your own enterprises where we
Mhm.
are, and also the global environment in which, or the domestic economic environment in which we operate.
Thank you for talking to us. And so there we have it. Stay tuned to BQ Prime for more updates on policy and economy. Thank you and goodbye.